Aaron Cole wanted nothing more than tea and silence on a late December afternoon. A single dad in his mid-30s, he sat alone in the corner of an upscale restaurant, unnoticed and unbothered, until an older woman slid into the seat beside him, her fingers closing gently around his wrist. Her voice was barely a whisper, urgent and trembling. "Please," she said, "pretend you're my daughter's fiancé, just for today." Before he could process what was happening, he was pulled into the center of a crowded family celebration. But Aaron had no idea who the woman he was about to hold hands with really was, or where this lie would take him. Aaron had worked 52 weeks straight without a real break. He drove a delivery truck Monday through Saturday, picked up weekend shifts at a warehouse when Emily's school needed new supplies or when her winter coat got too small. He never complained, not out loud. But today, the last Friday of December, he decided to give himself something small. A proper meal, a quiet hour. Just him and a cup of tea in a place with cloth napkins and soft lighting. The restaurant was called Harlow's, tucked into the older part of town where the buildings still had crown molding and the tables were spaced far enough apart that conversations stayed private. Aaron ordered the roast chicken special and a pot of Earl Grey. He sat near the window, watching the afternoon light fade into pale gold. It felt strange to sit still. Stranger still to be alone without Emily tugging at his sleeve or asking him to check her homework. He loved his daughter more than anything in the world, but today, just for an hour, he let himself breathe. The noise came from the back corner of the dining room. At first, it was just the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter. A large family had gathered around a long table, maybe 15 or 20 people dressed in their holiday best. Aaron didn't pay much attention until the voices grew louder. Not angry, exactly, but pointed. The kind of talk that wanted to be overheard. A woman with silver hair and pearls leaned across the table, her voice cutting through the low murmur of the restaurant. She was speaking to someone Aaron couldn't see, but her words carried with surgical precision. "Well, I'm just saying, Claire, most women your age have settled down by now. It's not natural to be so focused on work. Don't you want a family?" Another voice chimed in, younger but no less sharp. "Aunt Linda's right. You're what, 36 now, 37? The clock doesn't stop, you know." Aaron set down his teacup. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the conversation had a gravity to it, a cruelty wrapped in concern. He glanced over and caught sight of the woman they were talking about. She sat near the center of the table, her posture straight, her expression carefully neutral. She wore a simple black dress and no jewelry except a watch. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers laced together, knuckles pale. She didn't respond to the comments. She just nodded slightly, as if she'd heard it all before. The woman with the pearls wasn't finished. "I mean, it's wonderful that you have a career, dear, but what's it all for if you're going home to an empty house every night? Don't you get lonely?" Someone else laughed, the sound thin and performative. "Maybe she's married to her job. Is that it, Claire? Are you waiting for the perfect man to fall from the sky?" Aaron looked away. It wasn't his business. He didn't know these people. But something about the way the woman, Claire, held herself made his chest tighten. He knew that look, the one that said, "I'm fine, even when you weren't." He'd worn it himself more times than he could count. An older woman sitting beside Claire stood abruptly. She was smaller, with kind eyes and graying brown hair pulled into a low bun. She excused herself from the table, her voice calm but firm, and walked toward the restroom. On her way, she slowed as she passed Aaron's table. She glanced at him, then at the family gathering, then back at him. Her expression shifted, something like desperation flickering across her face. Before Aaron could register what was happening, she sat down across from him. Her name was Margaret. She didn't introduce herself right away, but Aaron would learn it soon enough. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him with an intensity that made him freeze mid-sip. I need to ask you something, she said quietly. And I know it's going to sound strange, but please hear me out. Aaron set his cup down carefully. He had no idea what to expect, but he could see the strain in her eyes, the tightness around her mouth. She wasn't joking. I'm listening, he said. Margaret glanced back at the table, then leaned forward slightly. That's my daughter over there, Claire, the one they're all tearing apart. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, something raw beneath the composure. She's a good person. She works hard. She's kind. But every family gathering, it's the same thing. They ask her why she's not married. They make her feel like she's failed somehow. And I'm tired of watching it. Aaron didn't know what to say. He could hear the pain in Margaret's voice, the frustration of a mother who couldn't protect her child from something as insidious as judgment. But he still didn't understand why she was telling him this. I'm sorry, he said carefully. That sounds really hard. Margaret shook her head. I don't want your sympathy. I want your help. She reached across the table and rested her hand lightly on his wrist. Her grip was gentle, but urgent. I need you to pretend to be her fiancé, just for today, just for this meal. Aaron blinked. For a moment he thought he'd misheard her. I'm sorry, what? Margaret's expression didn't waver. I know how it sounds. But look at you. You're here alone. You're well-dressed. You look kind. If you could just sit with us for an hour, let them think you're with Claire, it would stop the questions. It would give her one day of peace. She tightened her grip slightly, her eyes pleading. Please, I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. Aaron opened his mouth to refuse. This was insane. He didn't know these people. He didn't owe them anything. But then he looked past Margaret, back to the table where Claire sat. She was staring down at her plate now, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if she were trying to make herself smaller. The people around her were still talking, still laughing, still picking her apart with smiles on their faces. And Aaron thought of Emily. He thought of the way the world would one day look at her, judge her, measure her worth by things that didn't matter. He thought of the kind of man he wanted to be for his daughter, the kind who didn't look away when someone needed help. He exhaled slowly. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Margaret's face flooded with relief. She squeezed his hand once, then stood and motioned for him to follow. Aaron left his tea and his half-eaten meal behind and walked toward the table, his heart hammering in his chest. He had no idea what he was doing, no plan, no script. But when Margaret introduced him to Claire, when she said, "Everyone, this is Aaron, Claire's fiancé," and the table fell into a brief, stunned silence, he didn't hesitate. He extended his hand to Claire, and when she took it, her fingers trembling slightly, he smiled at her like they'd known each other for years. Claire's eyes widened. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a second, Aaron thought she might pull away, might call the whole thing off. But then she looked at her mother, at the expectant faces around the table, and something shifted in her expression. She didn't smile. Not yet. But she didn't let go of his hand either. Hi, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the din of the restaurant. Aaron sat down beside her. Margaret took her seat on Claire's other side, her relief palpable. The woman with the pearls, Aunt Linda, recovered first. Well, she said, her tone sharpening with suspicion. This is quite the surprise. How long have you two been together? Aaron looked at Claire. She looked back at him. Neither of them had an answer. But before the silence could stretch too long, Aaron spoke. A few months, he said evenly. We've been keeping it quiet. Didn't want to make a big deal out of it until we were sure. Claire nodded, her grip on his hand tightening slightly. That's right, she said. Her voice was steadier now, but Aaron could feel the tension radiating from her. We wanted to wait for the right time. Aunt Linda's eyes narrowed, but she didn't press further. Not yet. The rest of the table erupted into questions, congratulations, curiosity. Aaron answered them as best he could, improvising details on the spot. He said they'd met through a mutual friend. He said he worked in logistics. He said he admired Claire's drive and intelligence. And with every word, Claire seemed to relax just a little bit more. By the time the appetizers arrived, they were holding hands under the table, and Aaron realized something strange. This didn't feel like pretending. It felt like something else entirely. The questions came in waves. Aunt Linda wanted to know where Aaron lived, what kind of car he drove, whether he'd met Claire's college friends. A cousin named Greg asked about his job, nodding along with polite disinterest when Aaron mentioned logistics and delivery routes. Someone else, a younger woman with a sharp bob and sharper eyes, asked how he proposed. Aaron hadn't prepared for that one. He glanced at Claire, and she looked back at him with something close to panic. But then she smiled, a small, careful smile, and said they were still figuring out the details, that they wanted something simple, private. The lie held. Barely, but it held. Aaron could feel the scrutiny from every direction, the way people leaned in when he spoke, waiting for him to slip. But he didn't. He kept his answers vague enough to be believable, specific enough to sound real. And Claire, to his surprise, played along seamlessly. She laughed at his jokes. She touched his arm when she spoke. She even corrected him once, gently, when he said they'd met in the fall, and she said it was late summer. It was such a small detail, but it made the whole thing feel rehearsed, like they'd actually lived this story together. By the time the main course arrived, the tension at the table had shifted. Aunt Linda still watched them with suspicion, but she'd stopped asking questions. The younger relatives had moved on to other topics, gossip about someone's new house or someone else's failed business venture. Margaret caught Aaron's eye from across the table and mouthed a silent thank you. He nodded back, feeling strangely complicit in something he didn't fully understand yet. Claire's hand was still in his. Her palm was warm, her grip firm, but not desperate. Aaron wondered if she could feel his pulse through his fingertips, if she knew how fast his heart was beating. He wasn't nervous exactly. It was something else, something unfamiliar. He'd spent the last 3 years building a wall around himself, telling himself he didn't need anyone, that Emily was enough, that wanting more was selfish. But sitting here, pretending to be someone's fiancé, he felt that wall start to crack. When the meal finally ended and people began to gather their coats and purses, Claire leaned close to him and spoke quietly. Her breath was warm against his ear. "Can we talk? Just the two of us?" Aaron nodded, and she stood, excusing herself from the table. He followed her through the restaurant, past the bar and the hostess stand, out onto the small patio at the back. It was cold, the kind of dry December cold that made your breath visible. Claire crossed her arms over her chest and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there, staring at him, and Aaron realized she was trying to figure out what to say. Finally, she let out a long breath. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "I don't know why you said yes, but thank you. That was the first family dinner in years where I didn't feel like I was being dissected." Aaron shrugged. He didn't know what to say to that. "Your mom seemed desperate. I just thought I could help." He looked down at his hands, at the faint grease stains on his knuckles from loading boxes all week. "I know what it's like to be judged for things that don't matter." Claire tilted her head slightly, studying him. "What do you mean?" Aaron hesitated. He didn't talk about his life with strangers. He didn't talk about it with anyone, really. But something about the way Claire looked at him made him want to be honest. "I'm a single dad," he said. My wife died when our daughter was 2. Emily. She's 7 now." He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of those words settle between them. "People look at me like I'm doing something wrong just by existing. Like I should have figured out how to move on by now. Like being alone is some kind of failure." Claire's expression softened. She uncrossed her arms and took a step closer. "I hate that," she said quietly. "I hate that people think they have the right to measure your life against some imaginary standard." She looked away, her gaze drifting toward the darkening sky. "They do the same thing to me. Every holiday, every birthday, every time I see my extended family. It's the same questions. Why aren't you married? Don't you want kids? What's wrong with you?" Her voice didn't rise, but Aaron could hear the frustration beneath it, the exhaustion. "I've built a career I'm proud of. I work 80 hours a week. I lead a team of 40 people. But none of that matters to them. All they see is a woman in her late 30s without a ring on her finger." Aaron didn't know what to say to that. He wanted to tell her that she didn't owe anyone an explanation, that her life was her own. But he knew how hollow that would sound. Instead, he just nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I get it." They stood there in the cold for a while, not speaking, just breathing. Aaron thought about going back inside, about saying goodbye and going home to Emily, back to the life he knew. But then Claire spoke again, and the words stopped him. "Would it be weird if I asked for your number?" She looked at him, her expression uncertain. "I mean, just in case. In case they ask about you again. Or if I need someone to talk to who actually understands." Aaron smiled. It felt strange smiling like that, but it also felt right. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." They exchanged numbers right there on the patio, typing each other's names into their phones with cold fingers. Claire saved his contact as Aaron C., and he saved hers as Claire. No last name, no context, just a name and a number, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Over the next few weeks, they kept in touch. It started with a text from Claire 2 days after the dinner. Just a short message saying thank you again and asking how his holiday had been. Aaron replied, and then she replied, and before he knew it, they were texting every day. Small things at first. Claire sent him a picture of a terrible cup of coffee she'd bought at the airport. Aaron sent her a photo of Emily's latest art project, a drawing of a dragon made entirely out of purple crayon. Claire asked about his work, and he told her about the routes he drove, the packages he delivered, the regulars who left him cookies at Christmas. He asked about hers, and she said she worked in finance, managing investments for a firm downtown. She didn't elaborate, and Aaron didn't push. They met for coffee one Saturday morning in early January. Claire suggested a place near the park, a small cafe with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. Aaron brought Emily, who was shy at first but warmed up when Claire asked her about school and her favorite books. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily, naturally. Claire told a story about a disastrous pitch meeting where the projector had caught fire, and Emily laughed so hard she nearly spilled her hot chocolate. Aaron watched them together and felt something shift inside him, something he'd thought was gone for good. After that, they started meeting regularly. Coffee turned into lunch, lunch turned into walks through the park, walks turned into dinners at quiet restaurants where they could talk without interruption. Aaron told Claire about his wife, about the accident, about the way grief had hollowed him out and left him struggling to remember who he'd been before. Claire told him about the pressure she felt to prove herself, to be twice as good as everyone else, just to be seen as equal. She talked about the loneliness of success, the way people treated her differently once they knew what she did for a living. Aaron didn't treat her differently. He just listened. Emily adored Claire. She asked about her constantly, wanted to know when they'd see her again, whether Claire would come over for dinner. Aaron tried to keep his feelings in check, tried to remind himself that this was just friendship, that he didn't have the right to want more. But it was getting harder. Every time Claire smiled at him, every time she touched his hand across the table, every time she sent him a text late at night just to say she'd been thinking about him, Aaron felt himself falling, and it terrified him. One evening in late January, they were sitting on a bench near the playground, watching Emily climb the jungle gym. The sun was setting, casting everything in shades of orange and pink. Claire had brought coffee for both of them, and they sat close together, their shoulders almost touching. Aaron could smell her perfume, something light and floral, and it made his chest ache. He wanted to say something, to tell her how he felt, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just sat there, holding his cup, watching his daughter play. Claire spoke first. "Can I ask you something?" Aaron looked at her, and she was already looking back, her expression serious. "Do you ever think about what comes next? Like, after this? After we stop pretending?" Aaron's throat tightened. He didn't know how to answer that. "I didn't know we were still pretending," he said quietly. Claire's eyes searched his face. "Are we?" Aaron shook his head slowly. "I don't know." "Are we?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, and Aaron could see the vulnerability there, the fear of being wrong. Finally, she reached over and took his hand. "I don't want to pretend anymore," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I like you, Aaron. I like spending time with you. I like the way Emily looks at me like I'm someone worth knowing. I like the way you make me feel like I don't have to be perfect all the time." She squeezed his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know what this is, but I don't want it to end." Aaron felt something break open inside him, something that had been locked away for years. He wanted to tell her that he felt the same way, that she'd become the best part of his day, that he thought about her when he woke up and when he went to sleep. But before he could say any of it, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, intending to ignore it, but the notification on the screen stopped him cold. It was a news alert. The headline read, "Local CEO Claire Daniels closes $75 million acquisition deal." Below it was a photo of Claire standing in front of a sleek glass building, shaking hands with a man in a suit. She looked powerful, untouchable, nothing like the woman sitting beside him on a park bench. Aaron stared at the screen. $75 million. CEO. He read the words again, trying to make sense of them. Claire noticed his expression and leaned over to see what he was looking at. When she saw the headline, her face went pale. She pulled her hand away from his and sat back, her arms crossing over her chest. "I was going to tell you," she said quickly. Her voice was defensive, almost apologetic. "I just didn't know how." Aaron didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile the woman he'd come to know with the woman in the photo. Claire Daniels, CEO. $75 million. He thought about his own life, his delivery truck, his one-bedroom apartment, the way he had to budget for Emily's school supplies. He thought about the gap between them, the chasm he hadn't even known existed. And he felt something cold settle in his chest. Claire was still talking, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It doesn't change anything. I'm still the same person. I just didn't want you to see me differently." But Aaron was already standing, already reaching for Emily. "We should go," he said. His voice was flat, distant. "It's getting late." Claire stood too, her eyes wide. "Aaron, please, let me explain." He shook his head. "There's nothing to explain. You're a CEO. I drive a truck. That's just how it is. He called Emily over, and she came running, her face flushed from playing. She waved at Claire, but Aaron didn't give her time to say goodbye. He just took her hand and walked toward the parking lot, leaving Claire standing alone by the bench. He didn't look back. He couldn't, because if he did, he knew he'd see the hurt in her eyes, and he didn't think he could handle that. Over the next week, Aaron stopped responding to Claire's texts. He didn't answer her calls. He told himself it was for the best, that they were from different worlds, that he'd been foolish to think it could work. But every time his phone buzzed and her name appeared on the screen, he felt a sharp pang of regret. Emily noticed the change. She asked about Claire constantly, wanted to know when they'd see her again. Aaron made excuses. He said Claire was busy with work. He said they'd see her soon. But Emily wasn't stupid. She could tell something was wrong. One night, after he'd tucked Emily into bed, Aaron sat alone in the living room with the lights off. He thought about Claire, about the way she'd looked at him on that park bench, about the way she'd said she didn't want to pretend anymore. He thought about the life he'd built for himself, small and safe and predictable. And he thought about the life she lived, vast and successful and completely out of his reach. He told himself he'd made the right choice. But deep down, he knew he was lying. 2 weeks passed in a blur of silence. Aaron went through the motions of his life, driving his routes, picking up Emily from school, making dinner, putting her to bed. But everything felt muted, like he was watching his own life from a distance. Emily asked about Claire every other day, her voice hopeful at first, then confused, then quietly resigned. Aaron hated himself for that. He hated that he'd brought someone into their lives only to pull her away. But he didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know how to bridge the gap between who he was and who Claire needed him to be. On a cold Tuesday evening in early February, Aaron was washing dishes when someone knocked on his apartment door. He wiped his hands on a towel and glanced at the clock. It was almost 8. Emily was already in her pajamas, curled up on the couch with a book. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, Margaret was standing in the hallway, her coat buttoned up to her chin, her expression serious. Aaron froze. He hadn't seen Margaret since the dinner at Harlow's, hadn't thought about her at all except as the woman who'd started this whole mess. She looked older in the dim light of the hallway, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. She met his eyes and said, "Can we talk?" Aaron stepped aside and let her in. Emily looked up from her book, curious but silent. Margaret smiled at her, a warm, genuine smile, and Emily smiled back before returning to her reading. Margaret didn't sit down. She stood near the door, her hands clasped in front of her, and spoke quietly so Emily wouldn't overhear. "Claire told me what happened," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a weight to it, a disappointment that made Aaron's chest tighten. "She told me you saw the news, that you walked away." Aaron opened his mouth to defend himself, but Margaret held up a hand. "I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to tell you something you need to hear." She took a breath, her eyes never leaving his. "Claire came to me 3 days ago. She was upset. Not angry, just sad. She told me she'd been honest with you about everything except her job, and when you found out, you treated her like she'd betrayed you." Margaret's voice softened, but the disappointment didn't fade. "Do you know why she didn't tell you? It wasn't because she was ashamed. It was because every time someone finds out what she does, they change. They either treat her like she's untouchable or like she owes them something. And she thought you were different." Aaron felt the words hit him like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't about the money or the title, that it was about him, about his own inadequacy. But Margaret wasn't finished. "She doesn't care that you drive a truck, Aaron. She doesn't care that you live in a 1-bedroom apartment or that you work 60 hours a week to make ends meet. What she cares about is that you made her feel like she could be herself. And then you took that away the second you found out she was successful." Aaron looked down at his hands. He didn't know what to say. Margaret stepped closer, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You're not poor, Aaron. You have a daughter who loves you. You have a life you've built with your own hands. That's not nothing. And if you think Claire is too good for you because she runs a company, then you're not the man I thought you were." She didn't wait for a response. She just turned and walked to the door, stopping only to look back at him one last time. "She's not asking you to be someone you're not. She's just asking you to believe that you're enough." After Margaret left, Aaron stood in the middle of his living room, her words echoing in his head. Emily had put down her book and was watching him with wide, worried eyes. She got up from the couch and walked over to him, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Are you okay, Daddy?" she asked. Her voice was so small, so full of concern, that it broke something inside him. Aaron knelt down so they were eye to eye. He brushed a strand of hair out of her face and tried to smile. "Do you miss Claire?" he asked. Emily nodded immediately, her eyes brightening. "Yeah, I really liked her. She was nice, and she made you smile a lot." She tilted her head, studying him the way only a 7-year-old could. "Why don't we see her anymore?" Aaron didn't know how to explain it in a way that would make sense to a child. He didn't know how to explain it to himself. But then Emily said something that stopped him cold. "I think you should call her, because when she was here you were happy. And I like it when you're happy." Aaron stared at his daughter, at the simplicity of her logic, the clarity of her love. And he realized she was right. He'd spent so long convincing himself that he didn't deserve happiness, that wanting more was selfish, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Claire had seen him, not as a struggling single dad or a man who couldn't measure up, just as Aaron, and he'd thrown that away because he was too afraid to believe it was real. He pulled Emily into a hug, holding her tight. "You're right," he said quietly. "I should call her." Emily grinned and pulled back, her face lighting up. "Do it now!" Aaron laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. Okay, I will." He waited until Emily was in bed before he picked up his phone. He stared at Claire's name in his contacts for a long time, his thumb hovering over the call button. He didn't know what he was going to say. He didn't know if she'd even answer. But he pressed the button anyway, and the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, she picked up. Claire's voice was cautious, guarded. "Aaron?" He closed his eyes, the sound of her saying his name almost too much to bear. "Yeah, it's me." There was a long stretch of silence, and then Claire spoke again, her voice quieter now. "Why are you calling?" Aaron took a breath. "Because I was wrong. And because I owe you an apology." He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could imagine her sitting somewhere in her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, waiting. "I got scared," he said. "When I saw that article, when I found out who you really were, I convinced myself that I wasn't good enough for you, that you'd realize it eventually and walk away. So I walked away first." Claire didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "You think I care about any of that? You think the money or the title or the stupid news articles mean anything to me?" Her words came out in a rush, raw and unfiltered. "I spend every day in a world where people only see what I can do for them, where they measure my worth by the size of my bank account or the number of people I manage. And then I met you, and you didn't care about any of that. You just saw me, and I thought maybe finally I'd found someone who understood." Aaron felt his throat tighten. He could hear the hurt in her voice, the disappointment, and it gutted him. "I do understand," he said. "I was just too stupid to see it." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and regret warring inside him. "I'm not good at this, Claire. I don't know how to be with someone. I don't know how to let someone in. But I know that walking away from you was the worst thing I've ever done." There was another long silence, and Aaron thought maybe he'd lost her. But then Claire spoke, her voice softer now, almost tentative. "So what do you want, Aaron?" He didn't hesitate. "I want to try. I want to stop being afraid. I want to be the person Emily thinks I am when she looks at me. And I want to be with you. If you'll let me." Claire let out a shaky breath, and Aaron could hear the tears in it. "I don't need you to be perfect," she said. "I just need you to be honest, and to stop running every time things get hard." Aaron nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I can do that, I promise." They talked for another hour, the conversation shifting from apologies to laughter to plans. Claire told him about the deal she'd closed, about the stress and the long hours, and the way she'd thought about him through all of it. Aaron told her about Emily's latest obsession with dinosaurs, about the way she asked about Claire every day, about how much he'd missed her. By the time they hung up, it was past midnight, and Aaron felt lighter than he had in weeks. The next day, Claire came over. She brought cookies from a bakery near her office and a small stuffed dragon for Emily. When Emily opened the door and saw her standing there, she shrieked with joy and threw her arms around Claire's legs. Claire laughed, the sound bright and unguarded, and Aaron felt something settle inside him, something that had been restless for years. They spent the afternoon together, the three of them, playing board games and watching a movie and talking about nothing in particular. Claire fit into their lives like she'd always been there, like the weeks apart had never happened. And when Emily fell asleep on the couch between them, her head resting on Claire's shoulder, Aaron looked at Claire and knew with absolute certainty that he didn't want to lose this. He didn't want to lose her. A few weeks later, on a Sunday morning in late February, Aaron found himself back at Harlow's. This time, he wasn't alone. Claire sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her expression peaceful. Emily was at a friend's house for a playdate, giving them a rare moment to themselves. The restaurant was quieter than it had been that first day, the tables mostly empty, the light streaming through the windows soft and warm. Aaron looked at Claire and felt a sense of gratitude so deep it almost hurt. She'd given him something he hadn't thought he deserved. Not just her time or her affection, but the belief that he was worthy of both. And in return, he'd given her the one thing she'd been searching for, a place where she didn't have to be anyone but herself. Claire caught him staring and raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "What?" Aaron shook his head, his own smile widening. "Nothing. Just thinking." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving his. About what? Aaron thought about all the things he could say, about how much she'd changed his life, about how grateful he was that Margaret had sat down at his table that day, about how he'd gone from being a man who just wanted to be left alone to someone who couldn't imagine his life without her in it. But instead, he just reached across the table and took her hand. "About how lucky I am," he said simply. Claire's smile softened, and she squeezed his hand. "Me too." They sat there for a while, the silence comfortable, the world outside continuing without them. And for the first time in years, Aaron felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because his life was perfect, or because all his problems had disappeared, but because he'd stopped measuring his worth by what he didn't have and started seeing the value in what he did. He wasn't rich. He didn't have a fancy job or a big house. But he had Emily. He had this moment. And he had Claire, who saw him not as a struggling single dad or a man who wasn't enough, but as someone worth knowing, someone worth loving. And that, Aaron realized, was more than enough.